Cyno, a character teased since version 1.0. He's making a shocking entrance to make you aware of his wolf presence. Get it? Because he's literally a wolf? Cyno is quite a fun character, and I have him at C1. Thanks to Dendro carrying the Electro element, he has access to both Aggravate and Hyper Bloom teams, and he has EM scaling, so you can build him many ways. In actual content where you can use him, he's quite the fun character, but if you plan on using him in the overworld, it can be very frustrating. Speaking of frustrating things, what's up with my ping? Do you have an unstable connection, or you started Genshin in a server that wasn't close to where you live, or if you're just traveling, you may notice that your ping will really begin to suffer. If you want lower and stable ping, then we could take advantage of Gear Up Booster. Gear Up Booster is a program that reduces lag and can help eliminate bad ping spikes. Gear Up Booster is safe to use and optimizes your network. It's able to make your network connection more stable and stop those random spikes in your ping. You don't have to even set anything up for it either. All you have to do is click this button here and you're good to go. Genshin is boosted and now you can enjoy smooth gameplay. Did I mention it's free? So you can try it for free and see if it works for you. Go check out Gear Up Booster in the video description below and the pinned comment. Now, let's get back to discussing Cyno and his kit. So his elemental skill in his normal form is just an Electro Dash. Very underwhelming. It has a long cooldown and doesn't even do a lot of damage, so in other words, it sucks. His burst unlocks the true power of Cyno, so let's delve deep into it. Cyno's burst gives him Electro Infusion, he gains increased elemental mastery, and interruption resistance. Firstly, the interruption resistance is hardly noticeable, and he can be miserable to play against enemies with no interruption resistance that can send him flying, but the real perks of his burst is that it unlocks his elemental skill. His skill will be upgraded, but not all the time. If you time his elemental skill with the eye that appears on screen, it will do an enhanced slam with good area of effect and will fire out more elemental bolts. When using Cyno, you want to time your elemental skill between normal attacks to line this up. It's actually fairly easy to do with a little bit of practice because the trigger appears on screen. So to make things simple, use your skill, use your burst, normal attack spam, CNI, press E, rinse and repeat. So when Cyno's burst is active, he can do many things. But when it's not, well, Cyno is one of the most miserable characters to play in the overworld. As you know, characters like Xiao and Raiden have access to their elemental skill to output damage. Xiao has a lot of damage behind his elemental skill and Raiden's elemental skill is constant, so you can trigger it with other reactions. For Cyno, he gets one instance of electro damage every 7 seconds, and it's extremely weak outside of his burst. In the overworld, it can be very weird to have to burst just to kill very small things. And then you have to wait to refill his burst to kill the next very small thing. That aside, he works wonders in Abyss as well as Domains. His passive increases the whole spiel about the QuickTime event that I just talked about, and the other one gives him normal attack damage based on 150% of his EM, and also increases the bolt damage based on his EM. His talent priority is his burst, then his skill. And don't be a dummy and raise his normal attacks on accident like I did. You should be leveling his skill and burst at around the same time, however. Now, let's discuss Cyno's best artifact set. I will say, without a doubt, you should be using 4-piece Thundering Fury. While he can gain energy during his burst, it's about 1 to 2 particles per E-cast, and that won't refill his energy in all of his teams. But with Thundering Fury, you can enjoy decreased cooldown on his elemental skill and get off between 7 to 9 elemental skill casts. This will greatly decrease his ER requirements, and this set also increases every elemental reaction damage that Cyno will be doing. Because of this, I must say hands down is his best set. If you don't have Thundering Fury, then you can still use 4-piece Gilded. It offers competitive damage and you won't be able to spam its elemental skill, but let me tell you, it's much funner to spam that skill than not. In Hyper Bloom teams, Gilded is much more competitive with Thundering Fury, but that extra energy is seriously no joke. It'll let Cyno burst every rotation without much issues. For substats, it depends. Generally, you want a little bit of EM on Cyno, but you don't want to go full EM. You can go attack percent or EM Sands, and then you want an Elemental Goblet, and finally a Crit Hat. In his best teams, he will be doing both Aggravate and Hyper Bloom damage, and he wants to be scaling into his personal damage. As for his weapons, he has quite a few options. Before I got his signature weapon when also pulling for Dia's weapon, I was using Deathmatch, and overall, it was pretty good. He can use any DPS spear, but some good 4-stars are the free-to-play Missive Wind Spear, which you get from the Windbloom event, I believe. Dragon's Bane is also pretty decent, despite the passive not being too effective, and the legendary weapon from the Liyue chest, White Tassel. I can't find another one. It seems like I accidentally burnt all of them, and I didn't know that it was limited to only Liyue chest, and your boy maxed out exploration in Liyue. Maybe I can find one laying around somewhere. I mean, maybe. White Tassel is a decent option on him because of the absurd amount of normal attack damage that it gives, but it's definitely on the lower spectrum of his best weapons. Another great craftable option is the Ketane Crossbear. If used correctly, it will help tremendously with his ER requirements. You have to be careful though, because if you use the skill before his burst, you will lose energy and will have to wait a few seconds. If you use it after his burst, then you should be completely fine. Basically how the spear works is, when you use your elemental skill, which gets increased damage by the way, you will lose 3 energy, and you'll gain back like quadruple that amount of energy. The better the refinements, the better the energy gain. Now, let's talk about his teams. Hyper Bloom or Aggravate, with Hyper Bloom, or actually Quick Bloom, pulling ahead by a decent margin. Cyno also appreciates some interruption resistance, so Xingqiu is probably one of his best options. His absolute best option, however, is Nahida and Baizhu. Nahida's skill lasts 25 seconds, the entirety of Cyno's burst, which is 18 seconds. The issue with Nahida though, is that during multi-wave content, she has to be swapped in to apply her mark. Cyno is very bad at multi-wave contents because of this, since when you swap out of him, his burst ends. But with a Hyper Bloom team, a lot of the times you can kill the fodders with the other members of the team. Now, Baizhu is probably one of Cyno's best options. I've never tried it myself, but having a shield refresh every few seconds and deal damage is what Cyno is asking for. The duration won't last the entirety of Cyno's burst, but it's good enough. Now, with those two out of the way, let's talk about the new character in our rosters, Furina. Furina is another character whose skill and hydro application lasts throughout his burst, which is a major plus. In addition, Furina boosts Cyno's damage by an insane margin when you pair him with Baizhu, or you could even use Jean. Baizhu is better though because of the shield and dendro application. With all that in mind, I believe Cyno's best team is Cyno, Nahida, Furina, and Baizhu for Eternal Quick Bloom. The only downside to this team is Baiju's healing, which is still up at least 80% of the time. You can also go the pure Aggravate route and do really well, with the likes of Ether, Kirara, Yao Yao, Fischl, etc. The downside to not using Nahida is that Cyno is severely powered down when the Dendro application runs out, so he really wants Nahida on those teams. Beidou also works pretty well in Aggravate teams, as she gives him increased interruption resistance, and her damage is pretty good against multiple enemies. Kuki is another good option, and she can be included in both Hyper Bloom and Aggravate, since she heals at all times. Well, with C2 anyways. She doesn't work too well with Furina though, because her healing barely offsets the damage drain from Furina. Now, let's talk about Cyno's Constellations. You have been seeing a C1 Cyno the entire video, and he feels nice. When I use a trial Cyno, I hate it. I had the luxury of pulling C1 Cyno day 1, and it feels so much better. Cyno does not need Constellations though, and I don't think you should be getting them considering both Furina and Baizhu is on this banner now. Plus, While it does feel a whole lot better, the damage increase isn't actually that much because of how attack speed works in this game. His C2 now is pretty amazing. It basically gives Cyno 50% electro damage bonus. Every time he does a normal attack, which is always, he gains 10% electro damage bonus, stacking up to 5 times. Very nice increase to his damage. His C4 gives him more energy every time he does a reaction. I don't think this con is worth it because if you're using Thundering Fury, it's fine for the most part as far as his energy requirements. But I guess if you did want to use Gilded for a small increase to his damage, then you could try to get this constellation. But it's a C4, so it's just nice to have, I guess. His C6, basically what it does is that it fires off a ton of bolts of Electro, and he gets more of these bolts every time that he does his E. So, a lot of electro application and a lot more damage. So all in all, Cyno is a solid character that gets stronger with each Archon release. Nahida and Farina really help bring him to insane levels of power. What I hate about Cyno is that I literally can't use him in the overworld. When I'm exploring, I hate to use his burst just to kill fodder, and since maxing out his companionship, I just don't use him. I still use him in the Abyss, however, but I love the Abyss, so, you know, that's fine for me. I love Wolves, and among all of the bursts in the game, he is one of my favorites. I hate that he only has one charge on his skill in his base form, and then the damage on it is even lower. I can't even use him as a Hyperbloom driver in the overworld because he gets one E-cast. I wish they did something like Beto C4. When she gets hit, then she deals a little bit of electro damage. It's weak electro damage, but that would at least trigger Hyperbloom. So, if you like Cyno as a character, and you like the Abyss, then he will serve you well. But otherwise, you might want to consider other options. I guess Cyno's element isn't skilled enough to use in the overworld, but quite skilled in the Abyss. Get it? Because it sucks to use without his burst, and you only use the burst in the Abyss. Get it? Yeah. I still love Cyno and use him in domains when I get the chance, and he is one of my favorite characters on my account. In addition, Abyss is my favorite part of the game, as I mentioned, so that's a plus for me. Good luck pulling for the Jackal or Wolf of the Desert Cyno. He's very fun to play when there are enemies to use him against. Still here? Awesome. That means you could take a second to subscribe and like the video, right? Considering how only 1% of everyone here is actually subscribed, maybe we can make that 2%? Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, Enigma out.